I don't know how far we're going to make it this morning because, honestly, today as I was going over things, what we're going to talk about in this chapter of Joseph's life, I don't think it's something we just kind of want to rush through and get on to the next part of his life. I think it is weighty and serious enough to where we just kind of want to make sure that we're thinking about it and that the Spirit is able to speak through the text. So we'll see how things go this morning, but don't look at that and think, oh my goodness, we're 20 minutes in and Gordon hadn't, we're going to take our time, and if we need to cut it short and take it on again next week, we'll do that. But we started last week talking about the life of Joseph, and we're talking about not only expecting the unexpected, but actually embracing the unexpected. Most folks run from the unexpected or try to minimize the unexpected. As a people of God, we believe that God is at work behind the scenes. He's doing things we know nothing about. He's opening doors of opportunity. He's sending people into our lives. He's creating circumstances and situations that will allow us to share His glory, to love on people, and to introduce Jesus to people. And so we embrace the unexpected. That's what being a person of faith looks like, and we certainly see that in the life of Joseph. He had these God-given dreams. We remember those from the story of Joseph, those dreams that he had. They were big picture dreams, but God didn't give him the playbook, okay? God didn't give him a lot of detail. Okay, step A, next week, this is going to happen. In 2 months, you're going to be sold to slavery. In 6 months, you're going to face this trial. He doesn't give him that kind of detail, but as a person of faith, Joseph is confident that God is with him, that God is working things out to His glory as long as he walks faithfully. Now, the real challenges in the story, the real challenges for Joseph begin right about the time he takes those dreams public, right? Right about the time he prints those on a billboard for all of his brothers and his parents to see. Not everybody was enthusiastic or as excited about those dreams as Joseph was. In fact, since Joseph was clearly the favorite son of dad, of Jacob, a.k.a. Israel, as he is clearly the pet child of Israel, the other brothers did not like him very much. And that, I guess, would be the understatement of the hour. For in the book of Genesis, the word hate is used exactly 3 times, and each of those times it is used to describe the way Joseph's brothers felt about him. Okay? Not a real popular chap with his brothers. Not on great terms there. Now, the hatred of the brothers, we talked about this last week, it grew to the point where it was an actionable hatred, where they decided to get rid of their brother, to kill their brother. Eventually, instead of murdering him, they figured they could make a few bucks off of him, and so they sold him to a passing band of Ishmaelite traders. Now, have you ever had... Maybe you haven't had a day like this. I hope you haven't had a day like this where your big sister sold you into on eBay or something. I mean, that would be a bad day. But have you ever had a bad... Of course you had a bad day. Have you ever had one of those days where things don't work as planned? Of course you've had a day like that. Here's the testimony. I love this story. The testimony of a guy explaining an accident to his insurance company. All right? I'm just going to read his report. He says, I am writing in response to your request for additional information. In block number 3 of the accident reporting form, I put poor planning as the cause of my accident. You said in your letter that I should explain more, give more detail, and so I hope that the following details are sufficient. I am a bricklayer by trade. On the day of the accident, I was working alone on the roof of a new 6-story building. When I completed my work, I discovered that I had about 500 pounds of bricks left over. Rather than carry the bricks down by hand, I decided to lower them in a barrel by using a pulley, which fortunately was attached to the side of the building at the 6th floor. Securing the rope at the ground level, I went up to the roof. I swung the barrel out and loaded the bricks in it. Then I went back to the ground and untied the rope, holding it tightly to ensure a slow descent of the 500 pounds of bricks. You will note in block 11 of the accident report that I weigh 175 pounds. Due to my surprise at being jerked off the ground suddenly, I lost my presence of mind and I forgot to let go of the rope. Needless to say, I proceeded at a rather rapid rate up the side of the building. In the vicinity of the third floor, I met the barrel coming down. This explains the fractured skull and the broken collarbone. Slowed only slightly, I continued my rapid ascent, not slowing until the fingers of my right hand were 2 knuckles deep in the pulley. Fortunately, by this time, I had regained my presence of mind and was able to hold tightly to the rope in spite of my pain. At approximately the same time, however, the barrel of bricks hit the ground and the bottom fell out of the barrel. Devoid of the weight of the bricks, the barrel now weighed approximately 50 pounds. I refer you again to my weight in block 11. As you might imagine, I began a rapid descent down the side of the building. In the vicinity of the third floor, I met the barrel coming up. This accounts for the 2 fractured ankles and lacerations on my legs and lower body. The encounter with the barrel slowed me enough to lessen my injuries when I fell onto the pile of bricks. And fortunately, only 3 vertebrae were cracked. I am sorry to report, however, that as I lay there on the bricks in pain, unable to move, and watching the barrel 6 stories above, I again lost my presence of mind. I let go of the rope. Pain. An unfortunate turn of events. Joseph could relate, and I think we can relate as well. In an instant, Joseph's status as most favored son, elect child of Israel, of the head of the 12 tribes, changed drastically. He went from son to slave. The caravan carried him off to the market in Egypt, where he was sold to an Egyptian military leader named Potiphar. At that time, Egypt is essentially the world's only superpower, culturally and militarily. And by the time he arrived, it was already a great nation, involved in great building projects with the great Nile River. It was truly an ancient tourist destination, I guess you could say, but Joseph was not arriving in Egypt as a tourist, was he? He was a slave. He was now property to be bought and sold. He was in this nation as the lowliest form of life. He had nothing. He owned nothing. And in Egypt, he was a nobody. Right? That's how his day went. Okay. So, dragged far from home, into a strange land, surrounded by a strange culture, not understanding a word anybody said because it was in a foreign language. There he found himself at around the age of 17, late teens. He had lost everything. And his relationship with everybody who knew him and cared about him was completely severed. Now he lived at the whims of this man Potiphar, who was now his master, his owner. He hadn't had a bad day. He had a bad season of life, a bad series of months. But check this out. Joseph still knew God. Joseph still believed. Joseph still understood that even in this set of circumstances, God has not abandoned me. And we share that faith with Joseph. The faith that he had, that's our faith. We share that with him. Here's our promise in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 5 to 6. Here's our promise. God says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And so we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Would you read that with me? Let's read that out loud together. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? People who walk by faith, people who embrace the unexpected because they believe God is with them and God is working in all kinds of circumstances, they have a certain, I wouldn't say it's a swagger, but they have a confidence, according to Hebrews chapter 13. They have a confidence because they know that nothing they face is unexpected to God. Okay? They're going to have some surprises. Unpleasant surprises and hopefully some pleasant surprises. But nothing they face is a surprise to the God they love and worship. Now, people of faith like Joseph, they experience God in all kinds of situations, even those they never would have scripted out for themselves. People of faith are ready for anything because they believe that God can and will deliver on His promises. That God can and will use anything that happens to them or around them for His purposes if they remain faithful. If they remain faithful. Now, if anyone could have been broken down by life, Joseph is the prime example of a person who could do that, right? If anyone could have just kind of mailed it in and given up on ever amounting to anything, accomplishing anything, or having anything good happen to them, Joseph would be that person, but he was a person of faith. So listen, Joseph, look, he had every right to be depressed. He had every right to be miserable. He had every right to be bitter. Look at everything that happened, and it starts with his own family betraying him. Joseph, however, he wanted to live. And so he wanted to live. He wanted to overcome. And so he believed in a God who was greater than his present circumstances. Amen? Do you believe in a God greater than your present circumstances? I hope you do, because your God is far greater than what you're dealing with right now. Pain is inevitable. Okay? Hurt is inevitable. Misery is optional. So there he is. He is a slave in a foreign land, but the Lord is with him. And the Lord has plans for his life. Genesis chapter 39, we're going to read a little bit of this story. Genesis chapter 39, look at just a few verses this morning. Verses 2 to 6, we'll start out with. So here he is, but let's just say this. By all appearance, empirically, evidentially, it looks like what? Joseph has been abandoned by God, all right? I mean, anything you want to look at, it looks like he's been abandoned. But check out verse 2 here. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with him. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this, smart guy here, and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, and so he promoted Joseph. He made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge, he put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs ran smoothly. His crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, I love this verse. With Joseph there, Potiphar didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. So this guy Joseph, not only is God with him, we see some of his gifts. God, we've talked about this before, how God gifts us according to the needs of his church, according to the needs around us. The Holy Spirit imparts gifts to us and works through us. Joseph, very obviously, to state the obvious, he had an administrative gift set, a CEO kind of gift set. He was good at managing things and running things. He was good at leading a staff of people. He had the gift of administration. Right? Beyond that, obviously the key thing is the Lord was with him. He was a person of faith. He was connected to God. And so whatever he did, God blessed it. God prospered it. Whatever project, whatever work, whatever team he was leading at Potiphar's house, he very quickly rises through the ranks until he is running the whole place, right? Potiphar puts Joseph in charge of all of his holdings. His entire portfolio is in Joseph's hand, under Joseph's management, and everything is going great. And so, kind of like the text says, pretty much the only question, the only concern that Potiphar is left with is, will I have the lobster thermidor or will I have the prime rib, right? That's like the biggest worry this guy has. That's a good situation to be in. And some of you who are business owners or business leaders, you know what it's like to have somebody like this. Have a right-hand man or a right-hand woman that's there taking care of things, and you know they're going to they may do a better job than you would do. And it's just a blessing to work with people like this. And that's the situation Potiphar has. So in the chaos, let's go back to the big picture here. The chaos of being sold into slavery, ripped from his family, ripped from his life, ripped from his land, he is flourishing because he remains faithful to God. He has character in chaos. And to a great extent, our success will be defined by how we respond in chaos, in chaotic situations, in turbulent times. So let's take note. What I want to do, starting out with here, is I want to take notice, kind of stepping away from the story, look at the big picture of what's happening in his life, and let's talk a little bit about what it means to have character in chaos from Joseph's life. First and foremost, we see, this is on the outline this morning, first and foremost, Joseph understood something. He understood that his primary responsibility was to be faithful, all right? Outcomes are up to God. Doesn't mean that you don't think about outcomes. It doesn't mean that you don't plan. It doesn't mean that you don't work toward goals. But you understand ultimately God is the outcome giver. He's in the outcome business. Our role, let me put it this way. What I will be held responsible for, what you will be held responsible for, is ultimately, was I faithful? See Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. Was I faithful with whatever gifts God gave me? Okay? Many, few, good at this, good at these things. Was I faithful with what God gave me? Was I faithful with the money He gave me? Was I faithful with the relationships He gave me? Was I faithful with the business, with the education? Was I faithful with the opportunities God gave me? That's the ultimate question that I will be held responsible for, not outcomes. Okay? So as believers, we are able to remain faithful in any situation because we serve, check this out, we serve a God who is faithful. Amen? We serve a God who's faithful. He can be trusted, all right? And Hebrews 10, back to Hebrews 10 here, verse 23 says, oh, this is good. Let us hold tightly, without wavering, to the hope we affirm. For God can be trusted to keep His promise. We've affirmed a lot of faith this morning. We've sung some amazing songs to God. We've declared some things about God and our relationship to God, about our hope, about the promises He's made. We celebrated the communion together, and we did that as well. We declared who God is. We declared how He saved us. And so the passage here says, hold tightly to that. The faith that you affirm, the faith that you declare, live that out, because God can be trusted. He keeps His promises. And I think his situation is pretty tricky, I guess you could say. And in a situation where many, if not most, would have turned loose of their faith, Joseph tightened his grip on the hand of God. He held on tighter to God. He knew God would not quit on him, and he wasn't going to quit on God. When things get difficult, it is so tempting to kind of check out on God. I mean, not necessarily say, I no longer believe in God, but kind of check out on God. You know, I've believed in God, but look at my life. It's a mess. Look at my marriage. It's a disaster. Look at my business. I'm going bankrupt. Look, my child is sick. I've tried believing. It's not working. It's very tempting to come to that place. When chaos comes, a lot of people do just that. Distance from God, check out on God. Joseph does not reason that way. Because of the second big picture point here, Joseph does not reason that way. In fact, here's how he sees it. Part of being faithful involves, this is on your outline, the principle of blooming where you're planted. You've probably heard that expression before, blooming where you are planted. Honor God in all circumstances and situations of life. It's not like as a person of faith, as a believer, it's not like I get to look at the list, okay, in these situations, yes, trust God, trust God, trust God. Not here. Too difficult here, so I'll put a maybe on that one, a no on that one. No, being a believer, being a person of faith means I trust God in all situations, and I bloom where I'm planted, even if it's not a garden there that I chose to walk into. And when we're hurting, we want God to change our chaos. When we're hurting, we pray, God, change this situation, change the chaos. Often He doesn't change the chaos. He changes the child within the chaos. He changes us, okay? I can't believe I married this numbskull. God, give me a do-over, all right? Give me a do-over. Get me a brand new spouse. That's what I want. Or, I hate my job. God, change it. I hate my boss. Change my boss. I can't stand my neighborhood. God, change our neighborhood. Give us a new place to live. Here's the thing. Part of being faithful is inviting God into your present circumstances and choosing to be a blessing within those circumstances. Amen? Right? Where you find yourself, be faithful there. Instead of imagining, oh, someday, when this happens, when Mr. Right comes into my life, or when I finally get that promotion, then I'm really going to be faithful. No, faithfulness started for Joseph when he was at the bottom of the totem pole. The bottom of the ladder. Totem pole? That sounds kind of weird. Okay, not a totem pole. He was at the bottom of the ladder. All right, the bottom rung there. Slave, no rights. He was a piece of property. Not a great situation. He leveraged his talents, his work ethic. He leaned into God, and he became a difference maker in a difficult situation where he was planted, where he found himself. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't look for new opportunities. It doesn't mean that that you're not looking to change your life, to change your situation. It does mean that you choose to be a blessing. Simply this, that you choose to be a blessing wherever you find yourself. Finally, we learn from Genesis 39 this. And this is really what we're going to be developing the rest of today and maybe into next week. Finally, sin tends to derail God's plans for me. That's what it does. Sin causes me harm. Sin hurts those I love, distances me from the Lord, and sin becomes an enslaving addiction, or it very easily can become an enslaving addiction. So let's set it up here. Joseph is in Potiphar's house. The temptation here comes from the desperate housewife. I think we know the story, but let's go back to the story this morning. Potiphar's wife. Let's pick it up in verse 6. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. By the way, I love how the Bible deals with real life. Okay, it doesn't walk around in the clouds and pretend that we're all perfect or near perfect. It deals with real life. It deals with real life situations. And here is one of them. She wants to sleep with him. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." She, determined woman, kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. That's important too. Kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. She came and grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, this time demanding, not asking, "You will come and sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. I remember vaguely this story on flannel graph, like when I was growing up at church. I don't really remember what it meant, you know what I mean? Like, what is she doing, tearing in his robe? I'm not sure I think we know what she's doing, okay? Joseph resisted sin. Joseph didn't give in to temptation. He knew God's purposes for his life, and he knew that those purposes would not be served by sleeping with his master's wife. That would be a sin, in his words, a great sin against God. It would be a sin against marriage. It would be a sin against his master, who in spite of the master-slave relationship, in spite of that, had treated him very fairly and very well up to this point. And I think this story reveals, honestly, just a little footnote here. I think this story reveals, if we just kind of stop and then think about the imagery that we have as we work through the story, I think we're all playing some sort of film in our minds, and we're picturing this, and that's good, that's right to do. And I think the films that we play as we think about the stories, we read this story, they reveal a little bit, if we're honest, about the sinfulness in our hearts. I guess I'm talking more to men here. We know Joseph was a hottie, okay? I don't know if that's the New Living or the Message, but that's a valid translation. He was a good-looking guy. We know that. But I think we see something, men, the sinfulness of our heart. As we imagine this story, Potiphar's wife always comes out looking like some sort of Egyptian swimsuit model. The Bible never remarks on her appearance, okay? She could have been a swimsuit model. She could have been a sumo wrestler. We don't know, right? We don't know. But isn't it funny how when we imagine this story, whoa, she's gorgeous. She's amazing. We don't know that. In fact, she was probably unremarkable because the Bible did remark on his appearance, did not remark on her appearance. Probably just an average person. But whatever she looked like, that doesn't matter. There was temptation, believe me. There was big temptation here. Whether it was of a sexual nature or not, we don't know. But we know for sure there was temptation because we know that if he had given in to her, in many respects, his life would have been so much easier. Think prison term, okay? So much easier. Things would have gone so much more smoothly. So maybe there was a sexual temptation. There was certainly a temptation to protect his own hide and to continue this life of blessing and promotion that was going on. As it turns out, we know his resistance to her ends up getting him a false accusation, a false charge of sexual assault, and eventually a prison sentence. So he resisted her. The text says he avoided her. Eventually, he had a conversation with her. They have a conversation. And he explains why he is unwilling to sleep with her. And finally, he just has to run. This and this and this are not working. I'm going to run as fast as I can away from this situation. Now, everyone is tempted. Everyone. I don't care your age. I don't care how long you've been going to church. Everybody is. Jesus Christ was tempted. Right? Everyone faces temptation. But with temptation, there is a decision point. Okay? I can lean into God or I can lean into my selfishness. All of us are tempted. But here's the thing we know. Sin never gets me more aligned with God. Sin never gets me more in harmony with the Spirit and the amazing plans He has for my life. Sin may end up hurting you, hurting those you love. Sin may end up, and we know people, each one of us could tell stories. Sin may end up ruining your life. We know stories of that. It may just flat out, it may kill you. Disciples of Jesus, listen, disciples of Jesus take sin seriously. Okay? They do. Joseph took sin seriously. I'm not going to do this wicked. This would be a great sin against God. There's no way I'm doing that. He avoids it. He engages in conversation to try to end that. He runs away. He is serious about sin. Now, here, I really want to say this too. Potiphar's wife is not the villain, okay? We want to paint her as the villain in this story, and then Potiphar for throwing Joseph in prison when he's innocent of these charges. She doesn't know the Lord, right? She is not a person of faith. Neither is Potiphar. They're in Egypt, right? They worship pagan gods. And I think part of the reason the church gets a little bit of a black eye and the church looks so, to the world so condemning and judgmental and narrow-minded is we begin expecting people in the world and demanding that people in the world act like people of faith. See what I'm saying? Now, we should absolutely expect those who put on Christ and who declare themselves to be disciples of Jesus, we should have very, very high expectations. I know we're saved by grace, but there is a work of sanctification that the Holy Spirit is about in our lives, and if we are disciples of Jesus, we take sin seriously. But Potiphar's wife's not the enemy. That was probably completely normal. She owned him. He was property. How dare he deny her? She was in the right. Okay? Probably, according to her way of thinking. This made no sense that he would say no to her. But sometimes we expect people who aren't believers to act like believers, and that's just kind of weird. Anyway. It's up to us to be salt and light. It's up to us to share the good news of Jesus Christ with those who are living in destructive cycles of sin and hopelessness. It's up to us to be difference makers. Now, we will finish. I don't even think we'll get to those 5 points. We'll save that for next week, but we're not quite done yet because, like I said, we want to really work through this and think this is important stuff. So let's just set this up in terms of responding. Since we are all going to be tempted, wouldn't it make sense to have some sort of strategy? Wouldn't it make sense to have some sort of idea? How do I manage sin? How do I handle sin? How do I lean on God since I know I'm going to be faced with temptation? And the story that I always use, and some of you have heard me tell this story, the story that I always use when I talk to people about sin and how to respond to sin is the story of my friend Jason, back from my childhood years. I was 10 years old, he was 10 years old, and we played on the same baseball team, Little League team, back in Neosho, Missouri. Well, for me, I think played might be a bit of an overstatement. I wore the uniform. I love putting on that little uniform, right? And I loved all that, and I loved going to the games, and I loved getting the special suicide, right? I got the suicide if our team won. I got that from the concession stand there where they mixed all. It was great. And now I'm like, that is the worst idea ever. Mixing all the soft drinks known to man together, what a bad idea. But to kids, it's pretty cool. And it sounded cool, right? You know, I was not, I caught a few balls, swung the bat a few times. I wasn't much of a baseball player. Jason, however, was pretty much amazing. And what was amazing about Jason is in all of the games that we played, Jason batting 3, perhaps 4 times a game, Jason had a 100% on-base percentage. When Jason came up to bat, he never recorded an out for our team, always ended up on first base for our team. That's not an amazing stat. That's a stupendous fact. That is a historical wow. The Babe Ruth of Neosho Little League right there. The thing is, Jason was not a good hitter, or at least I have no evidence one way or the other as far as his hitting goes. I have to tell you, though, that it was great to be on his team, but I never actually saw him swing his bat. You see where I'm going with this? I never saw him swing his bat. Infielders would do the chant, swing, batter, 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 and the rest of us were so... Actually, that doesn't work. I don't know why people do that, but they would say, whatever. He never swung his bat. But he got on base every time. Because Jason had a minuscule strike zone. Okay? Jason had developed a strike zone for himself that was roughly the size of an acorn. I don't think Clayton Kershaw could have hit his strike zone. I really don't. Now, in our league, and you may go home and Google this, or I know there are all sorts of people care about the game in baseball, but I can tell you, in our league, and I think it's still true in Little League Baseball, that the strike zone was anything over home plate between the batter's armpits and the top of their knees. It was fairly generous, right? And pitchers needed to hit that strike zone in order to record a strike, but it was a virtually, if not an actual impossibility when it came to Jason, because he had this unique batting stance, which years ago I would have at this point tried to emulate that. I have a feeling that would be a bad idea. I don't want to rip my pants this morning, but he would go into this squat position, right, where his 10-year-old rear end was maybe 4 to 5 inches off of the ground, okay, and his shoulders were roughly the same height, all right, pretty much the same height. There was no distance between the shoulders and the top of his knees at all. So, when he came up to bat, every pitch was guaranteed to be a ball, and he would walk every time he came up to bat. Here's the thing. Because I know how weak I am, because I know how strong temptation can be in my life and the potential for that to ruin my life, whether it's my marriage, whether it's my relationship with my kids, whether it's my work relationship, because I know those things, I take sin very seriously. I ask for God to lead me away from temptation, not walk me into temptation, because I know that I cooperate with Him in prayer, because I know that I avoid sin, because I know that I shrink my strike zone. Okay? I shrink my strike zone. It may be a certain kind of movie for you, for us. It may be a certain website or kind of website. It may be an X on Facebook, right? It may be, whatever it is. I don't know what area or place for you is challenging, is difficult. But I know this, the enemy tends to attack us in our weak areas, whatever that area is, whether it's cheating on your taxes or mismanaging funds or whatever. The enemy attacks us in those places. And 99% of the destructive sins that we involve ourselves into happen because before we've ever sinned, we have opened ourselves up. All right? We've just made that strike zone really, really big, gotten ourselves into conversations we never should have been into. Sending text messages or Facebook messages that we never should have been sending. Looking at things that we never should. Things that were not per se a sin that we got ourselves involved in that just opened up our lives to attack by the enemy. Not being discerning, that is probably the number one problem that gets people into trouble. And we always think about that moment, that hour H where, oh boy, the temptation is upon me and I've got to, boy, how about you never get to hour H? You keep that strike zone so small the enemy can't get you. You're leaning on the Spirit and you're being discerning about the places you go and what you say and what you do. The question is, will I open myself up to temptations that will likely overwhelm me? Or will I shrink that, move away from that? Will I move toward sin or away from it? Will I move toward the work of the Spirit, walk, as Galatians 5 says, in harmony with the Spirit, or will I kind of walk a different direction? Those are the important questions. And if I'm serious about discipleship, then I'm serious like Joseph was about sin. And that involves shrinking the strike zone, shrinking the sin zone as much as possible, and leaning into the Spirit zone. The noble and the good and the right. And I love what everything pretty much C.S. Lewis writes. I think it's great, but this is fantastic. Oxford professor C.S. Lewis wrote these words about our choices. And we'll finish with this. Every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. And taking your life as a whole, with all of your innumerable choices, all your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing into either a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with fellow creatures and with itself. To be the one kind of creature is heaven. That is joy and peace and knowledge and power. To be the other means madness, horror, idiocy, rage, impotence, and eternal loneliness. He concludes by saying, each of us at each moment is progressing to one state or the other. And so as we continue the conversation, I think we'll stop there, but as we continue the conversation next week, we'll continue to talk about how to shrink that strike zone, how to open up to God, close myself to destructive sin that could ruin and destroy what I care about the most, what God cares about the most. How to step into those choices that turn me into the image of Jesus, and that turn me away from that old man of sin that will destroy, and the enemy who would ruin what is of most importance. Maybe this morning the choice that you need to make is a choice to accept Jesus, to accept what He won for you on the cross so many years ago. He knows you, He loves you, He won that victory for you. In faith, will you embrace that? Will you wear that? Will you be baptized into that? And today could be the day that you make that choice. Maybe today is the day you just get together with somebody and you pray over a situation. You're in chaos. Chaos might be a good word to define your life, your family, your business, your whatever right now, your health situation. And you just need to surround yourself with some sisters, some brothers who will pray over you. It could be somebody sitting next to you, your spouse, your family, your small group, your connection, whatever that is. We would invite you during our song time here at the end as we worship God together to just get together and pray over that issue that's on your heart. However you need to respond, do that as we stand together, we worship together.